the topic of this panel, we're taking a different turn from the previous one we just had up until now. Maybe something a little lighter. And I'll sit down in a second, yeah. What? Oh, it doesn't work? Hello? Hello? Okay, I'll give you mine in a second. So the title of this panel is basically the fifth chelik of the Shulchan Aruch, which is halachos that are beyond the daf. And I'll just introduce it with a story, but before that, let me introduce the chashav rabbanim that we have in front of us. So right over here is Chaim Shapiro, who is the Rosh Beis Medrash of Menachem Lora and the Menal of Tomchei Tmimim in Morristown. Smichas Chaver, there's a whole Chabad wing called Smichas Chaver Chabad that was started by Rabbi Bassman, who's here somewhere. And Rav Avram Jax, which is really incredible. So it's a big schus that you're coming. Next to him is Rav Shay Schachter, who is the Rav and the head of the Beis Medrash here in the Young Israel Woodmere. We had an incredible Shabbos, mamish and week, amazing. And then there's Rav Yitzchak Gettinger, who is the Marda Asra on the Young Israel of the Upper West Side. Correct? Amazing. Okay, so as we said, the goal of the title of this section of this panel is halachos that are beyond the Shulchan Aruch, and I'll introduce it just with a story, a fascinating story that I think really brings home, the title of this panel. So there was Lo Aleinu Velo Aleichem, a young couple in Avrech in Yerushalayim many years ago, who passed away at a very young age. And in Yerushalayim, the custom is that we're not mal in the mace, meaning right away after the person is niftar, they try to bury him as soon as possible. So the family looks into the burial plots, and there's two possibilities of where to bury this young avrich. Possibility number one is there was one very chashav chelka that had one spot left, so it would be just for him. There is another burial plot that is also a chashav one, not like the first one, and there they can have two chalakim, right, with the thought of having him and his wife. And they didn't know, what should we do? Should we put him by himself in the super chashav one, or should we, put him in also a chashav one? But there will be room there for two. So what do? They don't know the answer. So they go run quickly to Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and they knock on his door, and they say, "This is the shaila. What do you say?" So let's take a vote. Okay, let's take a vote. Who here would say that he should be buried alone? Hands up. Buried alone. Definitely not. Three people. Let's see. So what did Shlomo Zalman say? Shlomo Zalman said, you have to bury the mace by himself. Why do you have to bury the mace? Only three people thought of this, right? And maybe this is what you're onto. He said, why do you have to bury the mace by himself? Not because of what you think, not because it's a more chashiv and we're starting to compare halakos. He says they were a young couple. And now this almana, she's a young almana. She has her whole life ahead of her. If you're going to bury the mace in a chilak that has two halakim, that's another impetus for her to get married. And since she has her entire life ahead of her, and we want her to get remarried and continue her life, so why would we put in another stumbling block to help her really move her life forward? That you won't find anywhere in the Shulchan Aruch, right? That doesn't say that anywhere, I think. Meaning I haven't gone through every single sivkat, but I'm pretty sure it's not there. But where do you get that sensitivity? When you know kol haTorah kula, when you know everything, and then you're able to pick up on nuances and things that are important. So that's the idea or the topic of this panel, and I'm just gonna leave it up to the chashav rabbanim over here to either pick up on that or say personal stories. I'm sure there have been many stories that you as rabbanim have gotten throughout your life, or that you've heard from previous gedalim. And if you would share that with the tzibur, I think it would be a huge chizuk. For me, I always love hearing things like this. So b'chavod, whoever wants to start.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's amazing to be here, to be part of this Smichas Chaver. I'm one of the Magid this year as well, so it's a made covet for me to be here. First, I just want to go on the heels of one of the things that were mentioned before, just to add one nakuda that might have not been mentioned, only because it happened to me. I got a call once that I'm a partial match for a bone marrow transplant, and I freaked out, obviously. So I want to find out who it's for. Impossible. No way to find out. I called the biggest knackers in Hatzolah. Can you please find out in the registry who is the match? Is it a yid? That's what I wanted to know. Impossible. Until you agree, until everybody signs the papers, it's impossible to find out. Became the shaila now. Am I mechuyev now to go through this procedure not knowing b'chlal if it's a yid? So I called a few rabbonim, and they all paskin to me that this was years ago, that I don't have to, because you go basaroif, and roif people in the world, it's an international or national registry, is mostly goyim. So I'm not mechuyev. L'poil, I didn't feel right. I went, I wasn't a match. But there was one small conversation that I want to share with you that I had with a particular Rav. And he asked me, I called him, he said, and if it was a Yid, he said, would you go through with it? I said, of course. He said, what if it's not a Frum Yid? I said, what's even the Shaila? He was, Kol hakavod lecha. So to me, it was important that I got the message across. Obviously, for any Yid, obviously, if it was a Yid, I would certainly go through with it. But anyways, we mentioned these Shailas, B'kitzur, I don't want to take too much time about the sensitivity of the G'dayla Yisrael, sometimes who picked up on particular nuances. And generally speaking, we always tend to pick the nuance that goes l'kula. That's usually what we try to do. Like it was mentioned before, when you have a big Shaila, we have to figure out how to be matter the situation, and let's see if we can get to a kula. But sometimes we also have to remember that part of being sensitive is also to go l'chumra, and I'll illustrate with two small stories. First, with a quick milsa de b'dichase. You mentioned Reb Shlomo Zalman. Reb Shlomo Zalman had a particular kula, which I don't want to mention because it might be taken out of context. So someone said, why are you not mefarsim? He said, what do you mean? That's a knockoff on the Lashon. It's a chumra shein roi b'tzibur. I mean, everyone is machmer. But going with that, mahalach, my father is Zayin Gesunden Stark, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in the Yeshiva Miami. He was zoichet to be a shliach for Ezras Achim in 1984. Him and my mother, both of my parents, went for 2 weeks to Russia then, when they were sending shluchim in secret, clandestinely, to go as businessmen officially, and to be meifetz Torah and Yiddishkeit in Russia. So he went then for Purim, Tovshin Mem Daled, 1984. So he told me, he has stories galore, obviously. So one of the stories he said was as follows. He was traveling back with my mother. They had to catch a plane to fly back to America. And he gets a message that there's a bocher who's taking a train. He's sick, he has fever, but he has a very, very important child that he must ask you because there's no Rabbanim in Russia. And they used to ask the Rabbanim who used to come. And you have to wait for him in the apartment, and he's going to come, ask the Shaila, and then you'll be able to travel. Okay, so he travels, the bocher comes, and he says, this is the Shaila. Every year, they never finish the matzah because they don't know what's going to be next year. They don't know if they have matzah for next year, so they keep matzah from one year to the next year. So I have this box of matzah, shmura matzah, that I have waiting for this year Pesach. This is Purim time. And the shaila that he asked was, I opened the box of matzah without washing negulasa once. I didn't wash my hands, not negulasa. I didn't wash my hands. Maybe there's a chash, there's a drop of chametz on my fingers, and he tells my father, I don't want you to be mekel. I'm in Russia anyways, right? I'm in Russia anyways, so you could be mekel. He says, no, I want a real psak. What do you do here? Real psak. There's no shaila here, obviously. But mitzad the sensitivity in the 5th chelik Shulchan Aruch, if you would paskin for him, oh sure, it's mutter lechatchila, without a shaila you could be yetza ala kazesim, he would feel that you're not taking his ernstkeit and ehrlichkeit seriously. So my father ended up paskin he shouldn't eat the top matzah. He told him the top matzah you should take put aside, don't eat the top matzah, and he felt mamish in 7th heaven. And one more small similar story I'll share with you. This is a shaila that just recently happened. There was a particular person that ended up, for Rosh Hashanah, it was hard for him to walk up to shul, so he ended up staying in a different place next to the shul for Rosh Hashanah. And he's an elder Yid, he's Korev to Ben Tishim, very, very elder Yid, a Choshev Yid, and he became quite dehydrated over Rosh Hashanah, and it was necessary to bring him back to his apartment to be, and Miss Minyan, obviously the second day Rosh Hashanah, some blow shayfer for him, to be able to be home, to drink, take his medicine, whatever it was. It was a serious shaila of a choyle, possibly sheyesh besakana. And the shaila was, can they call a taxi on Yom Tiv to take him down, or do they have to go meshugeh, go to someone's house, get a wheelchair, put him in a wheelchair, Yom Tiv, and then wheel him down to his apartment? Now, al pi halacha bepashtus, there's no shaila, especially on Yom Tiv. Even if it's a choyle she'em besakana, it's a grome al yedei shinoi with a goy, moiled eish, it's only Yom Tiv, there's no shaila, he can go into a taxi. But the Rav paskent that if you're going to tell him he should get into the car, he's not going to want to get into the car in Rosh Hashanah. Shum panim v'ofen. He's going to say, Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to get into a car. Unless I'm going to the hospital, I'm not getting into the car. So the Rav said, he told the family, make yourself crazy. Go get a wheelchair. For the dignity of that Yid, that he should realize that we're respecting his ehrlichkeit and his frumkeit. So sometimes the 5th chelik of Shulchan Aruch is not only about being mekel, it's also to know when to be machmir, that we should realize that we're also respecting his ehrlichkeit. Just two small, short stories.
Beautiful. I wish you would just continue. How long is the session? We should just keep going. So I like to tell over that when I was single, when Rabbi Yitzchak and I were in Eretz Yisrael together learning, so I used to go to Rav Asher Weiss's shir every Tuesday evening. It was a beautiful shir. It wasn't as popular back then as it is today. And one of the highlights for me was not just going to the shir, but on the way back every week, there was a great Talmud Chacham who came to drive. He came in particular to drive him back from the shir to his home in Ramot, and they used to drop me off on the way. So that was a very special bonding time. We had an opportunity to talk a lot in the car. Now that Talmud Chacham was busy leading up to the ride home. He was busy doing his own thing, giving his own shiurim. So he wasn't able to attend the shir, but he used to come at the end just to do the drive. His name is Rav Tzviki Lau. You know who he is. Rav Tzviki Lau is a very chashuv person. And I got to know him. He's actually the son of Rav Yisrael Meir Lau. So what I like to say is that every week in the car, we all used to talk. Tzviki used to tell stories about his father. I used to tell stories about my father. And Rav Asher Weiss used to tell stories about himself. So it was very nice. One week we were driving home, and it so happened that we were driving through Bayit Vegan, and it reminded everyone about Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. We drove by Yeshivas Kol Torah, so that was the yeshiva of Rav Shlomo Zalman. So they said, you know what, why don't we tell stories about Rav Shlomo Zalman? So they told the following story, which I've never read in any book, but it was just so amazing to see the perspective of a Gadol B'Yisrael and how much sensitivity he has, which is not surprising. If you go through Rav Shlomo Zalman's Tshuvas, you'll see so often he gives a psak that's just so sensible, leaving out the rayas, leaving out whether it's 100% mukhrach al pi halacha or not. But you see, just the psakim that he makes are so sensible. They really resonate so often with the bottom line of what we would have said intuitively. So he told the following story that for years and years there was a negotiation in Yerushalayim that they should have the streets of Yerushalayim closed on Shabbos. And there were many religious communities that felt we don't want our children being exposed to cars that are going to be Machal Shabbos, people who are going to be driving on Shabbos, so they wanted them to be closed. Okay, back and forth, it wasn't really getting anywhere. At some point, the mayor of Yerushalayim, I think at the time it was Teddy Kolach, called up the Chaver HaKnesset, I think it was Menachem Parish at the time, and said, I have a map that's been drawn up. I'm ready to close the streets of Yerushalayim. And here's the map. I want you to come to my office to sign off on the map that this is what we're going to do. So he comes to the office. He looks at it. He was very disappointed. He wanted far more streets to be closed on Shabbos, and he was a little disappointed that they only closed off a certain small area of Yerushalayim itself. But he didn't want to sound like, so ingrateful to the mayor of Yerushalayim for finally granting his request. So he said, listen, by us, the Charedim, we don't sign anything without showing it to the Gedolim. So I would love to sign the map, but I'm not going to until I show it to a Gadol. So give me a few hours. Let me take the map home with me. I'll show it to a Gadol, and then I'll get back to you. His plan was he's going to show it to a Gadol, and then he's going to blame it on the Gadol that the Gadol didn't let him sign it. That was the plan. So he takes it to Reb Shlomo Zalman's house. Reb Shlomo Zalman looks at it, and he says, you can't sign this. So he was very excited. You see, Reb Shlomo Zalman told me I can't sign it. So he said, then Reb Shlomo Zalman realized that he misunderstood why you can't sign it. Reb Shlomo Zalman looked him in the eye, and he said, how can you sign such a thing? All of the Chilonim driving through Yerushalayim on Shabbos are now going to have to take a detour and drive extra time on Shabbos because of you. So because you don't want your children seeing cars driving on Shabbos, you're willing to take the achrayas of people who are now going to be Mechal Shabbos even more just because of your kids? How are you not thinking about them? And again, it speaks so powerfully to who Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was. But when you think about it, the truth is, this is the way Gedolei Yisrael always think. I'll just share one quick story. Just recently, probably in the last year or two, Dr. Pelkowitz, who I'm sure many of us are familiar with, so he's very well known, and he's involved in so many different cases, complicated cases in our communities. So he had heard that Rav Asher Weiss was in town one time. He said, I really have to speak to him. I have something that's bothering me. So he came to talk to him about a certain shaila that he was dealing with. So the shaila was, I'm not going to get into the details, but basically he said he has somebody who he's seeing now, and he said, I have a big issue because I'm just not sure when he comes to see me as a client, am I supposed to first work on his frumkeit? He gave up Yiddishkeit because of his psychological issue that he has. Or should I first deal with his psychological problem? Which one should I be talking to him about? Both of them require a therapist to talk them through. I'm just not sure which one should be the primary focus of the conversation. And Rav Asher Weiss turned to him and he said, if you're not alive, you can't be frum. if you're not alive, you can't be frum. And look at the numbers of the suicide rate for this condition. So what does it help? You're going to talk to him about Yiddishkeit? What does Yiddishkeit mean if he's not going to be alive, potentially? So the first thing you need to tackle is to understand that he needs to be healthy. He needs to be stable. We have to get him past this hurdle. After we get past that, we can talk about other things. We can negotiate, which reminds me, I just said I'm only going to say one more story, but let me just say one more once we're on this. I'm reminded, then I'll give it over to Rabbi Yitzchak and I'll be quiet the rest. I'm reminded that at some point, Rabbi Leibowitz mentioned to me the other week that he had heard my father say the same thing, but I've spoken to my father about it on a few occasions. There was a divorce in the community, and unfortunately, it was a very complicated divorce. One of the parents chose not to be religious at all. The other parent was sticking to the tradition and staying the same. They wanted to keep the kids in yeshiva. But the problem was it was an imbalanced couple. The one parent who decided that they wanted to stay frum was completely meshuga. They were completely like off the rails, really. They had serious psychiatric illness, real problems. And the other parent who chose not to be religious, not to be frum anymore, was pretty stable. And they were getting divorced because of this issue. Now, naturally, the frum community felt that the children should go with the spouse who was going to remain religious. And when we spoke to my father about it, my father said, absolutely not. It's more important that the children should be healthy and in a stable environment than it is for them to be in a frum environment. And even if it means, litza'arenu harav, as uncomfortable as it is for us to say such a thing, that we're going to send children to a non-religious home, knowing that there's no way they're going to observe any sort of semblance of Shmiras HaMitzvahs, but yet they have the opportunity to maybe live a healthy lifestyle and be able to be productive human beings as they grow older. My father felt, in his opinion, that was something that should be the choice that should be made, even though it may not be the most obvious and intuitive choice to make.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here. I want to share a couple of areas of halacha. You look at some of the poskim in Europe and relate it to some of the things that we have relevant today, how we see sometimes what's clearly in the Shulchan Aruch versus the way we practice la halacha, sometimes things can come off so different. So one of the first points I always think about is igunos, because igunos today, obviously, unfortunately, we still have igunos today in this world. It's not, the problem is still here. But the tshuvos on igunos, the power of what it meant to be a rav and to show someone real skill, creativity, innovation, and how to apply what the Gemara said to a practical case, there's no better place in halacha than igunos. Igunos was like the greatest minds in Europe, the greatest gedolim would write the tshuvos. And often the greatest controversies came from a real tifa shaila and igunos. There were different rabbanim who took that accountability and achrayas to write some of the toughest letters. And it wasn't just a psak that they would say, they had to put it in writing because they're giving it to a person who's trying to move on with their life. So you got to put it in writing, you got to put your name, and now you stand behind it. So oftentimes it would rip communities apart, understandably. And there's one tshuva that stands out from Chaim of Volozhin when he's writing it. He says that, he made a cheshbon with all of the Gemaras, back and forth, different rayas, different rishonim, and he says, I didn't have a heter. But he says that then he looked at the Almani, he looked at the Iguna in front of him, and he says, Re'isi demasa alechya. He says that I see the tears streaming down her cheeks. Asisi cheshbon in bari ha'olam. I made a calculation of my sugya together with the Ribbon Shel Olam, v'itartiya. And I came up with a heter. So that's an idea of, from Reb Chaim, which is something that sometimes boggles the mind. If you read some of the tshuvas, him, Reb Chaim Oizer, many of the others, if you actually are learning the Gemaras and Yavamis and you look at some of the complexities in what they're doing, they're very hard to rationalize. It's very hard to say, this is a sensible thing, and it seems like the Gemara that this would be the emes. But when you're dealing with a problem and you're dealing with people in front of you, so then igunos was a different thing. Today we try to figure out where do we feel the Yeridus Hadairis the most. So, sometimes when you're first starting off as a Rav, first you're all nervous. You get a few shilas. You're able to look them up, found the answer. You could tell the person what the answer is. You're like, okay, I can do this. It's not that big of a deal. But very quickly, you realize that it is a crazy big deal. And then when you're dealing with real problems and real issues and changing circumstances and things like that, so then, there's got to be a cheshbon with the Bari Island. And only like greatest shoulders like Reb Chaim were able to really show us what the derech and the mahalach of how to treat people. Another example that comes to mind is there was a famous line, and this is really the preface to the point that's relevant to us. There's a famous line in Europe that used to go, it's better in Yiddish, but in English it goes, that the chicken on Thursday is different than the chicken on Friday. That's true. Throughout Hilchos Basar B'Chalav, there are so many differences, but Makom Hefsid, especially the complicated shilas of Hilchos Treifus, where there are so many different layers of chumras upon chumras upon chumras, and different shilas and sirchos back and forth. Person has to look at the chicken different when it's on Thursday than when it's on Friday. We know the Torah itself, the direction from the Navi, so there are different values. And halacha is not always just being able to say what it says in the book, but it's to realize that all of halacha is to balance competing values. And it's very rare to have one circumstance in halacha where there's only one value, because it's life and it's complicated. So for example, the shaila that came, it's actually a pretty common shaila that can come up, but someone who was cooking for Pesach, and they realized that they had made a mistake, and they cooked everything. The Sunday before Pesach, everything, all the ingredients, all the food, and they cooked it, and it was in the non-Pesach Dike Kalim. Kalim they hadn't used for a long time, but it was non-Pesach Dike Kalim. So that's a very hard shaila. That's a very serious shaila. None of this is la halacha, but just trying to give an example. There were many more variables, but they came and they wanted to know, so what's the din? What's the halacha? If you put all of the variables together, it came out that b'makom hefsid, you're allowed to be mekel. So, b'makom hefsid, what's a greater makom hefsid? A person spends all their Pesach shopping, hundreds and hundreds of dollars there, if not thousands of dollars in the kelim and the entire Sunday and all the anxiety of Pesach coming. Is there not a greater makom hefsid for such a thing? But the person, what do you mean? I'm not b'makom hefsid. So look at the person, you say, I don't understand. If you're not b'makom hefsid, then who is? What does it mean? What does it mean to be alive with the halacha? And to understand that sometimes that the greatest, coolest, that they're talking directly to us and the conflicting values and what it means to be the Sunday before Pesach. And it's another thing to know objectively that it says, b'makom hefsid yesh lahakel, but what it means b'makom hefsid. What hefsid means to yourself and how to have a sense of worth. That to not to waste your entire Sunday and to realize that there's a hefsid to that. So that's an important value. The thing I think it relates the most to us today, at least where I live in the city, is that there's another line. Most common question that I get asked in the city is the Erev kosher? Definitely the most common question. And so this is exactly it. I have this line. I have a Messiah from my Elter Zayda. He used to say the following question. Someone would ask, is the Erev kosher? He used to say as follows. An Erev is not a chicken. What he meant is as follows. With a chicken, after all the variables and said and done, sometimes it's Thursday, sometimes it's Friday, but you come out with a psak. You come out, it's kosher or it's treif, and you follow the kosher or treif and you're done. You move forward. It says an Erev is not a chicken. You can never say it's kosher, you can never say it's treif. That's not the right thing. We were zeicha to learn in Smichas Chaver so many times. The second question is, what floor do I have to live on that I can tell the guy to push the elevator? That's the second question. So, we learned, shvus to shvus, b'makom tzarech gadol, right? What's tzarech gadol? What does that mean? So, this rabbi said 9, this rabbi. How do you apply to life? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to know someone with a carriage, without the carriage? What age children? What it means to be cramped? What it doesn't mean? An older person. So many variables. And to think that something is right there superficially in what the words say, so we have to realize that there are greater shoulders and greater people who have guys show us the guidance and how to actually apply the halacha to our lives.
Can I just pick up on one thing that Rabbi Gettinger just mentioned about conflicting values? I think you see it from the Gemara itself, that whenever we deal with a shaila, you have to look at the overall picture and perspective and really consider all of the conflicting values at the same time. So for example, the Gemara Maseches Gittin, maybe many have not learned the whole Masechta, but many people have learned this Gemara because it has to do with the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So it's in the middle of the 5th parak. The Gemara tells the devastating story about Zechariah ben Avkulas. And ultimately the Gemara says because he made the wrong calculation, he made the wrong decision, Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So what happened? Somebody had brought a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash and they were matil mum bekachim. They deliberately went and made some kind of small blemish in the animal, which was not so noticeable. Most people who would see it would not even realize that there was something wrong. But the Gemara says either it was bedukin shaba'ayin or something in the ear, something very small, something very minimal, which obviously a responsible Kohen would make sure not to bring it on the Mizbeach, not to offer that carbon. But the Gemara says they were faced with a dilemma. This carbon was sent by the Roman Caesar, but there was a Jew who brought it, and the Jew was the one who deliberately went and made the mum in the kachim, which would disqualify it from being brought as a carbon. So this became a problem. The Gemara says that they were trying to weigh the different options. On the one hand, the Gemara says, maybe we should just shoot the messenger, kill the Jew. This way the message will never get back to Rome. They won't find out. The Gemara says, oh, we can't do that because matal mubakachim yaharik. People are going to say mistakenly that if somebody makes a mum and kachim, which is an isser, but it's not a chi of misa, people are going to walk away with the mistaken impression that you get killed for that. Then the Gemara says, okay, so then why don't we just offer the carbon, even though generally we don't offer carbonos that have a mum. Under the circumstances, what are we going to do? The Gemara says, nope, people are going to walk away with the mistaken impression that you're allowed to bring a Baal Mum, Craven Lagabi Mizbeach. What you see, what I find fascinating in that whole discussion, the Gemara is bringing you through the mind of the leadership at the time to try to see which is the most important value. We're faced with a situation here which is very complicated, which is very different. There's no right answer. There's no way that we can win. So what should we do when we have conflicting values and all of them are important values? Being matal mum b'kachim is a terrible thing. People walking away with the wrong impression is also a terrible thing. And what you see from the Gemara is that they're trying to use all of those competing factors to come up with a solution that would make sense. It turns out, the Gemara said, they made the wrong decision. But you see that when you deal with a shaila, you have to look at all the different angles and all the different perspectives, which my father often tells me that he heard b'shem Rab Chaim. I don't know if this is printed anywhere, but they say b'shem Rab Chaim that the Gemara sometimes asks for a source for a certain halacha. So the Gemara says, well, bring a pasuk. Fine, the Gemara brings a pasuk. Then the next line it follows, Lama likra svarahu. Why do you have to bring a pasuk? It's so obvious. So what do you mean? Reb Chaim asked, why do you have to bring a pasuk? I can say a svara. I can always say a svara. If I have a pasuk, that's the strongest raya. That's the strongest proof. How can you compare the two? Reb Chaim said no, because svara is also very important in halacha. A person having a seichel hayashar, knowing how to say a proper svara that really makes sense in halacha, is also an incredible value, and it's just as valuable as a pasuk itself when it comes to the issue of psak halacha.
The mile of speaking number 3 now is I can hamshik every single thing. I had a Rosh Hashiva. Rabbi Sroel Friedman, Allah Shalom, passed away from Corona Nebuch. Svara zadiraisa. That's the words he used to use. Svara zadiraisa. Which is going on the heels. You mentioned about, first of all, Eidiv, and there's a word that says there's no Eidiv that's possible holidays and no mikveh, that's kosher holidays, no mikveh that's possible holidays. Based on the famous Rambam, Kolam Bat Yisrael Ba'olam. But you mentioned about Igunis, I'll share a story from a Godel. 2 stories I'll mention from Rabbi Yosef, 2 fascinating stories. One is, it's famous, but maybe you haven't heard it. He was about to go into a very, very dangerous surgery. And the schedule for the surgery, he had to go in for the surgery. And he asked that the surgery be pushed off for an hour. Shay, they had no choice. They were trying to convince him it's very dangerous. It's sakona. He has to be pushed off for an hour. Turns out that he was in the middle of writing a tshuva to be matir in aguna. And he was afraid that if he goes on the table and he doesn't wake up from that surgery, this woman will not get the heter aguna. So the Bavadia waited, pushed off the surgery, Mesiris Nefesh, Pikuach Nefesh, and finished writing the tshuva to be able to be matir that woman. That just goes to show of the obviously the Ibergegebenkeit of the G'dayla Yisrael. There's another story. This I actually saw a video of Rabbi Yosef saying the following story. He says a woman was walking in the street Chol Hamoed Pesach, and she's holding a pot of soup, and she's crying, bitte de tren. She's crying. So he meets her and he says, Biti, the way he used to speak, my daughter, what's the matter? She says, I just went to the Rav, and I told him that I by mistake used the Chometz Dike pot to cook the soup. So what's the story? And the Rav paskin that it's treif, and I'm crying. So Rabbi Vadia says, he thought you were an Ashkenazi because you have blonde hair. You're a Sephardi. It's kosher. Now, he doesn't say the background in the conversation, but it's actually Machlokes Mechaber Ramah if an Eine Ben Yomer is mutter on Pesach. The Ramah al Pi Aminik says it's osir. The Mechaber says that it's mutter. This Keli was certainly an Eine Ben Yomer because it was Chol Hamoed. Nobody cooked Chometz on Pesach. So obviously, if you're a Sephardi, it's going to be mutter. So he tells her, you're a Sephardi, so it's kosher. So here's the fascinating part of the story. So she tells him, Rebbe, whatever, Kvod Harav, you're just saying that to calm me down. You don't mean it. He says, yes, I do. And he went and he drank a little bit of the soup. Now, did he know what kind of level of kashrus she had? I have no idea, etc., etc. But in order to make her feel comfortable that it's 100% kosher, so he drank from the soup. In the case that you mentioned of cooking Erev Pesach, there's another component which people don't realize is part of a component of being matir, using Chometz Dike Kelim, and I imagine it was a Ben Yoimai. That's why he needed to have some merubah, because for Pesach, Eine Ben Yoimai is mutir l'chatchila l'choladeis, is the sugi of nat barnat, which according to many poskim, Chometz Ateidabola, so therefore in Erev Pesach, it would also be a component to rely on to be matir, but have some merubah.
I'll add to the story that you just said now, that recently just happened, was So mamish is fine. You can hold it. Yeah, with tasting from it. So Rav Amar, who's here, we're gonna be to see him shortly. When it comes to kashrus for himself, he's fairly machmir. And what I mean is, he'll only eat meat that he himself shachted, or that he oversaw the shechita. Right. So right now we were in America for a whole week or so, and all he eats is fish. Right. There's no meat except for Shabbos. Shabbos we brought meat from Eretz Yisrael that he shachted. It was with us all the way here, and then his rebbitzin cooked it, and we ate it at Rav Shai's house. So the Baal Batim who are hosting him, they know this. So they're very nervous with everything that comes to do with kashrus. So when we come into the house that we're staying over here, David Sokol's house, so he has a beautiful meal set up. For lunch, it was Friday, it was like 12 o'clock, he has fish and pastas and all sorts of different things, and the Rav starts eating, and it was great, and it was amazing. And he's all nervous, right, because I think naturally anyone would be, I would be, after I was eating in my house. And Mr. David Sokol's father comes in and he cracks a joke and he says, "Oh, like, is this from the kosher store? Like, where did you get all this stuff?" and you just see like his face, like, just, like starting to think. And Rav Amar, he says, "Oh, the shechita on the fish." He says, "Shechita on the fish is okay." Basically, he was trying to he picked up the sensitivities right away, and he diffused the situation, as they say. But these are real things that we always see, meaning the sensitivity that's above it. Another thing that was mentioned over here is that a lot of times you're not, the shayla that Rabbeim get, you're not necessarily answering the shayla, but you're answering the person. And there's a famous story, also I'm sure a lot of people here heard the story from Chaim Brisk, that a woman came to him on Erev Pesach, and he said, "Rabbi, could I be said the dalit kaisis with milk, right? So is it considered, is that Chamer Medina, is it not? Could be Yitzchak, Pesach, whatever." So what did Rabbi Chaim do? He went to the room, he came back with a bundle of cash, and he said, "Here, go buy wine and go buy meat." And his talmidim that were there, they said, "What's going on? Right? That's not what she came to ask." He said, "No, I'm not answering. It's not a lucky question. I'm answering the person. She's asking about milk for the dollar cases. Obviously, she doesn't have wine. And if it's milk, so then obviously also what does she have? She also doesn't have meat. She doesn't have flesh. She says, I need to give her money not just for the wine, but also for the meat itself." And that's what it means, answering the person, and not necessarily answering the shadow. But we can.
When you asked me to speak, that was the story I know. I'm not going to say because it's so famous. Baruch Hashem, you mentioned it. Just to illustrate another point when it comes to sensitivity, it was once a very choshev erov that came to Montreal to visit, and he was known to be a big kanoi, and he would speak his mind a lot. So he came to visit Rav Hirschsprung. Rav Hirschsprung, we all know, is a big guy in a Boki B'Shas. I actually got fahed by him. Just to describe to you a fahed of a Godel B'Yisrael, you started to read, and he just rattled off word for word. Now that he knew Gemara Shas, everybody knows. He knew every single Shach and Taz and the Meforshim Necheshem Mishpat by heart, word for word, with the mistakes. He would say, this is a mistake and it's supposed to be printed differently. Anyway, so he came to this Rav. So Rav Hirschsprung tells him, I want to tell you a story. A woman came to Rav with a chicken. So the Rav looks at the chicken, says, Shvera Shaila. He took out a Shulchan Aruch. And he starts to look in the Shulchan Aruch for the Shaila. After a minute, the woman starts to say, Rebbe, you're looking in the wrong halachas. What do you mean I'm looking in the wrong halachas? You're looking in Ilchas Treifas. You have to look in Ilchas Kashrus. You got the wrong siman in Shulchan Aruch. He was trying to send this Rav a message that you have to look with the right eye and not always with the left eye to make sure that the person feels that you're at least trying in Ilchas Kashrus to find the proper psak halacha.
My father loves that story. If anyone sees him later, let him know that you said over that Maisa. He'll be very happy. So I know this is supposed to be a Leibedic session, which so far it has been, but unfortunately sometimes we're faced with very, very sad. I mean, Rabbi Gettinger spoke about shilas and igun and issues like that, which are extremely painful, but from time to time we all have a confrontation with pikuach nefesh shilas, with end-of-life issues. Maybe I'm zocher to hear more of this than many other rabbanim are. It's not because anyone's calling for my opinion. I don't have an opinion, but because they know I can get in touch with my father. And there aren't so many great gedolim who are prepared to answer shilas and end-of-life issues and pikuach nefesh. So I can say at least once a week, probably more, I'm on the phone with the doctor and my father, dealing with somebody in the hospital, trying to make an end-of-life decision. And it's something that I would imagine any of us would feel that after hearing this multiple times a week for the last 60 years or so, you probably would lose a sensitivity toward the issue that's being discussed. And I can say that I don't remember a single conversation that I've had with my father about any of these issues where he hasn't stopped to cry in the middle of the discussion. We can be talking about a 90-year-old individual who's in the hospital, end of life, had a wonderful life, and everything's, just taking its course, and naturally the body is letting up. But it's a certain sensitivity that you see. I remember distinctly at the very beginning of COVID when here in New York, the hospitals were completely overwhelmed. There's a doctor that I'm very close with who is the head of the pediatric ICU in Cornell. And she's from. And she called with a shayla. She said, whenever we have a patient who's end of life and the hospital or the family makes a determination that they need to pull the plug, she said, I'm a from person. I never do it. We always send somebody else to do it. A different part of the medical staff does it. And this way it's not it's not something that I'm involved in personally. It's not something I'm engaged in with my own two hands. And she said the problem is we have a 17-year-old boy. He was not Jewish, and he was end-stage cancer, and he was suffering so much. And she said the family would like to pull the plug. So she said normally what I would do if it was any other circumstance, I would get somebody else, an associate. But right now, if I pull anybody else out of a different ward, it will make other patients die because we're so understaffed. We don't have enough. We don't have enough personnel here to take care of what needs to be done for the critical care of our patients. So to take somebody away from this, to get them to do something which is so routine and so simple to do, I feel almost I'm killing someone via dime on the other side of the ward in order that I shouldn't be involved in this. I would say that's a very serious shayla. So she called me to ask what she should do. I call my father. My father doesn't know her. So she starts describing the scenario, and it's quiet. And she starts saying, hello, did I lose you? So I texted her on the side, he's crying, give him a minute. She wrote to me, what's he crying about? And I said, he hears these shaylas every day. And even though you're describing a nachri who's 17 years old, who's end-stage cancer, who wants this to be done, and it's a decision that the family is comfortable with, it's what to cry about. And it's something that I feel often people don't get a chance to see that side of a psak. They don't get to see it. Not necessarily does that always change the outcome of a psak, but that always needs to be a part of the psak. It always needs to be a part of the process, that we need to be able to appreciate and understand the sensitivity of the family. Just a couple of months ago, I was told an unbelievable story by Rabbi Goldwicht from Flatbush. And he said that he was a very close Talmud of Rabbi Shmuel Auerbach. He said Rabbi Shmuel Auerbach, when he got to a certain age, I forgot if it was 90 or maybe 85, I don't remember what age it was, but when he got older in his years, so Rabbi Shmuel Auerbach told the Talmud who used to drive him around that he doesn't have koyach anymore to attend the chasnas of his Talmidim. So the Talmud was a little bit disrespectful, but he turned back to Rabbi Shmuel and he said, it means so much to the Talmidim when you're there. And we're in Eretz Yisrael. It's not the formality of America. When they have a chuppah in America, it's a whole to-do, a whole big deal. You're stuck there for the whole day. Here in Eretz Yisrael, I drive you. The chuppah's outside, so I'll drive you right up to the chuppah. You'll stay in the car. When they're ready for you to come out to make your bracha, you'll come out of the car, you'll get right back in, we'll drive, we'll leave. So what's the big deal? So he said, no, you don't understand. I have koyach. I come to yeshiva every day. I'm still giving shiurim. That's not what I meant. Reb Shmuel Auerbach told him, I unfortunately was never zeicha to have children. And all these years, I've been attending the simchas of my Talmidim. But in order to have a feeling of what it means for a parent to marry off a child, I'm going to a simcha. I want to really identify with the simcha that the parents and the grandparents are having. I used to spend an entire day at home preparing myself to try to imagine what does it feel like to marry off a child so that I can really be mesameach the family. I'm at a stage in my life where I don't have koyach to do that anymore. Is it right for me to go to a simcha and not really be able to identify with the simcha feeling that the family has? I can't go anymore. Amazing story. One of so many. But that's the way Gedolei Yisrael think.
That was such a powerful point, especially about your father crying with shtika. So, I mean, this is a little bit of a joke, but I think there's a different perspective sometimes in shtika, which I wish as Rabbi here we'd be able to implement a little bit more. So we were I was zeicha to learn in Brisk a little bit. And there were a lot of times we'd ask questions from Yeshua. In shir, out of shir, go down to his house, wait a half an hour for him, catch him sometimes. You'd ask him a shayla. And I would say, I don't have exact percentage, but I would say about 50% of the time you don't get an answer. In other words, he literally just looks you in the face, looks at you, and walks away. And I mean, it seems like horrible manners, obviously, but there's a way of saying, I'm moving on, I'm sorry. But it really does, and the chinuch in it, behind why the shtika, like in the Torah of Brisk, is so important, is that, we're talking about in psak, a life and death question. Can I do this? Can I do not? But oftentimes, as Rabbanim, we get questions that don't really need an answer. In other words, people are trying to work something through, think about something, grapple with something, develop something, and they're speaking through. But it's important to realize, so more often than not, that sometimes putting something in an answer actually limits something. And the thought process and going through it and trying to understand something that has so much greater value than what you could put in, say, mutter or aser. And sometimes, where you want to move on so quickly and say, mutter, and let me get home, but for the person to sit with the shayla that's not relevant la halacha right now and it's not pressing, let the question sit. What do you have to answer everything for? Why does everything have to be clear? And this rabbi said this and this one said that. Let it be a question. Let it be something that I'm not sure about. Let it be something that I'm actually living with a shayla. And sometimes in learning, especially today, there's this idea that a question demands and warrants an answer. And there's such a flaw in that way of thinking that there are so many times in life where the questions themselves are stronger. And to emphasize that it's right to question, and with the role of shtika as well, I think could do us all a good deal.
There are many, many times that I've been asked questions, unfortunately, about abortion situations that arise. And again, this is another area of halacha where there aren't so many rabbanim who are prepared to actually have the shoulders to take the achrayus of an abortion upon themselves. And it's a very tragic issue, and every time it's a tragedy. And I remember on one occasion there was a young couple, and they had a very, very serious prognosis for the child that was yet to be born. And they didn't know what to do. I said to them, who can I put you in touch with? Who would you be comfortable with? They said, if you can get in touch with Rav Asher Weiss, let's talk to him. Fine. So I got him on the phone. We started discussing the shayla. And he said, there's nothing to discuss. You need to go ahead with the procedure. You need to have an abortion done as soon as possible. So this husband pushed back a little bit, and he said, aren't you worried about a safek pikuach nefesh? How do you answer like that? Aren't you concerned about a safek pikuach nefesh? There are some who say that maybe this is ritzicha. So aren't you worried about that? And he said, it's important to be machmer on pikuach nefesh. It's important to be machmer on ritzicha, of course. But I'm a big machmer on family also. And there's no way that your relationship and your family is going to survive through this tragedy. I'm a big machmer. You must go immediately and take care of the abortion.
Just to add to the sensitivity of daily Yisrael, I once read a story that there was, we mentioned such a shayla before, there was a bocher, Balchuva, was supposed to get married. It was a few days before the chasna, and it turns out for whatever reason, he was a kohen, he couldn't marry her, didn't know what to do. Anyways, he went, it was the middle of the night, 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and he went to Shlomo Zalman's house. Shlomo Zalman, he went and knocked on the door. He came into the house, and he told him the situation. All the Shlomo Zalman did was, he sat with him and he cried together with him for a full hour. Couldn't help him. Nothing he can do. And later he told over, they described the Shlomo Zalman to him as a judge. He's a dayan, right? He's a dayan on the best nagodl or a sheshiva. Can you imagine if a judge in any country gives a verdict in a psak and you don't like it or you're not happy, you knock on the door, calls you in, and he sits down with you and he cries with you even if he can't help you? Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist in the world. It only exists by us Yidden, such an idea. And just to add one short story about how the Rabbanim, with their sensitivity, also took the halachas serious. The Chaim Brisker was once going through a shayla nagunas, and he was giving a shir. And it says in Sforim that if a Rav paskins that the woman is allowed to get married, even though the husband might be alive, so Beruchni Sainyonim, Hashem will make sure that the person is not alive. That's what it says in certain Sforim. We have to remember that today the question of Egunis is a whole different kind of shayla than it used to be when the husband was lost. So let's not confuse the two issues. Anyways, he was giving a shir once. And a bocher picked up his hand and said, I have a heter. He found a teisvis, and the teisvis is a kasha on the teisvis from another edition. And based on that shayla, we could be matter the Aguna. So Chaim Briske looked him in the eye and said, mit a kasha in teisvis is noch keiner nicht gestorben. From a kasha and teisvis, nobody died. It's a word, behemshich, to what you were saying. You could stay with a question, and he also used it to explain that we have to be careful when we paskin halacha because we're paskining nefoshes. not only pasking nefashos on people, the Tur gives a Rosh Tevis for the Shmoina Trefes. Trefes are split into different categories. There's Shmoina Chai Trefes, and there's Shivim Trefes in the Rambam. So he gives an abbreviation, Don Chonak Nefesh. I once heard from Rav Menashe HaKotner, Rav Menashe Klein, Shal Shuvas Mishnah Alochis. He said the following: when a Rav gets a Shaila, you have to know that you're being done, whatever your psak will be, is Chonak Nefesh. You can be taking away the Nefesh, whether it's a human, even the chayas, aliki, the godly chayas that exists in the food. If you're just going to paskin that it's treif, you should know you're being chonak nefesh. It's dan nefoshes, and therefore the rabbonim are taki careful and taki sensitive. And as we see in all these stories,
There's a story they tell about Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, that there were a lot of gedolim who were gathered together to have a Moshe Bezdin, and they were discussing a very serious shaila in Yerushalayim. And at the time, there was a young man who was sitting in the room who, inserted his opinion into the discussion. And immediately, mid-sentence, Rabbi Zalman cut him off, and he jumped out of his seat, and he started to say how, that's such an unbelievable svara. You're a brilliant young man. This is amazing. We're going to use it. And the man tried to stop him in the middle to finish off his sentence. He wanted to tell him, this is not my idea. This is from the Shach and Yeridea. I didn't make this up. I just remembered there was a Shach. Rabbi Zalman wouldn't let him finish the sentence. He continued to give him all of these tremendous accolades, totally exaggerated about him. The boy realized, I'm not going to be able to finish a sentence, so just forget it. And he sat back down, and Rabbi Zalman finished off the Moshe Bezdin. After they were finished and everybody left, the boy went over to Rabbi Zalman and he said, I'm embarrassed to say, but the end of the sentence was, this is not my chiddush. I just remembered a shach and yaredea that was relevant to the case. Rabbi Zalman said, I'm well aware, but I'm also aware that you're an older single bacher. You're not married. I wanted to impress everybody in the room that maybe they should find you a shidduch. I know it's a shach, and everybody knew it's a shach. But if I make them all feel that you are so impressive, maybe you'll have an easier time finding a shidduch, and somebody will have a great idea for you. They later told the story to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, and Rabbi Shlomo Zalman said, look at the sensitivity of Rabbi Zalman, that's one level. But think about it one level beyond. Rabbi Zalman then walked out of the room with all the other gedolim thinking, Rabbi Zalman forgot a shach. He's so excited about this guy, it's a shach in Yeridea. Did Rabbi Zalman forget it? Rabbi Shlomo Zalman said, that's the godless of Rabbi Zalman. Not just that he wanted to give a person an opportunity to look impressive to others, but that he was willing to humiliate himself. Everyone else in the room knew exactly that it was a shach, but he walked away and he understood that he was going to look a little bit silly in their eyes, but it was worth it for him, because that's what a gadol does.
I heard a story from Rabbi Wine, who touches upon some of the things that were said over here. There was, in 1949, 1950, there was the Panovich Rav created an orphanage for girls that were Holocaust survivors. And in Bnei in the summer, if you ever been zeicha or not zeicha, to be there, it is very hot and humid, and it gets the temperatures, it's unbearable almost. And no one then had air conditioning, so there was a certain individual whose house was right next to the orphanage of girls. And on Friday night, he decided, he says, he was done the meal, he says, let me learn. So he's sitting by the window because there's some sort of breeze coming in, and he's learning. And suddenly he hears the girls from the orphanage singing. He starts huddling, it's Kol Isha, it's not right, people should know, the windows are open, he doesn't know what to do. So he goes to find the Panovich Rav, and he goes to the Panovich Rav and he says, am I allowed to learn? There's Shaila, the woman over here, maybe you should tell them, you're in charge of the orphanage, maybe you should tell them to close the windows or to sing at a different time. I'm trying to Friday night, it's time to learn. So the Panovich Rav, he's like, I'm not gonna, what am I gonna tell you today? He says, let's go to the Chazon Ish. Excellent question. Let's go to the Chazon Ish. We walk into the Chazon Ish, open the door, and the Panovich Rav, he says, Adonai, go please present your question to the Chazon Ish. So he turns to the Chazon Ish and he says, Rabbi, I have a shayla. He says, I was learning Friday night, and I open the window, it's very hot, and I hear, next to me, there's the orphanage of all the girls that survived the Holocaust, and they're singing. Right? And Chazon Ish stops him. He says, what? They're singing? These girls? They're already singing now? He says, these girls who went through hell on earth, they're already singing? I can't believe it. And he says, let's dance. And he helps the girls dance, and they all have rikah. And then after a minute, he says, and what's your shayla? He said, okay. So that's also, part of the sensitivities that are here, of really speaking to the individual. Also, another shayla. There's a famous picture of Baruch Ber. And he's smiling and he's holding the Gemara. And Rabbi one explains that he once was walking with his father and he walked into a room and he saw this picture of Rabbi Berlibitz holding this Gemara and smiling, and he knew him. So he told the Balabas, he said, Rabbi, two questions on this question. He says, question number one is Rabbi Bar never smiled. Is why he's smiling. Number two, why is he posing with a Gemara? It almost looks like he's actually posing. So the person who had the frame, the picture, he told Rabbi Wine and his father, he said, I'll tell you the history behind the story. He says, this woman was an almana, and she takes out her camera and she wants to take a picture of Rabbi Bar. And he said, no, you can't take a picture of me. And he says, listen, I'm an almana, and I need this for my parnasa. How else I can sell the picture. So is it okay? He says, you're an almana, you need it for your parnasa. He says, tell me how to stand. Give me a Gemara. I'm going to hold the Gemara also, and I'm going to smile. So we're going to really, make a and that's what it was, and that's the source of that story of that as well. Any other final?
Just a small little word, short one that I heard B'Shem Rav Weinberg, who's a famous Lubavitcher Chassid. He said a Rav has to be careful when he deliberates that he shouldn't deliberate in front of the person, because once a woman came to a Rav with a shaila, and the Rav started to deliberate. He says, late the Rambam, according to the Rambam, it's mutter. She says, okay, the Rambam is great for me. I wish I have kids like the Rambam.
They tell a story that I think Rabbi Feldman in Atlanta was once in his office and somebody knocked on the door. He happened to be passing by the shul office, so he knocks on the door. He comes in, he sees the rabbi sitting with an open Gemara. He says, Rabbi, what happens in your office stays in the office. I'm not going to tell anyone. When we hired you, we thought you knew everything.